the war with Mexico, where the area we live in Phoenix became part of the United States, occurred in 1848. And generally people say that Phoenix began or started in 1868. So it took 20 years after the war with Mexico, approximately 20 years after the war with Mexico, for the Phoenix area to begin. And in those early years, there was a mixture of different people here. There was a lot of people from Mexico, a lot of, you got to remember in later years, Tucson, Yuma, many Mexicans that were part of Mexico became American citizens because there were communities there that went back to 1500 and something, way back. And, but there was also Mexicans crossing, looking to make a living. How can they, in this area? So early Phoenix was very close to half the population was Mexican, Mexican-American, and there was also soldiers of fortune here, veterans from the war, the Civil War. So you had a conglomeration of a lot of different types of people, a lot of some Europeans also. So it was people all trying to make a living in the wilderness area. But it is interesting to note the first census taken show close to half the population was Mexican, Mexican-American. There were many buildings that were important to the Mexican community of Phoenix at one time. And it's very important to preserve those buildings that bring back the memories of those long past communities and all the thriving things that occurred in those communities. The city of Phoenix wanted to identify those historic properties that are important to the Mexican community of Phoenix. And so they put together this survey to try to find those properties that are still existing that were important to the community.
But all of them, they've always played a major role, a defining role in the growth of this valley.
The first woman, non-Indian woman, to come into the Phoenix area was a Latina. And Trinidad Escalante was her name, and she was the wife of Jack Swilling. Jack is always credited with basically building an irrigation system to irrigate the land. His workforce was almost all Hispanic, Mexican-Americans that were helping to build these canals, to do the agriculture.
My fondest memory was when it was a small town, and I was young, and being a child, and being with my friends, and there was no rush. Everything was slow.
If you look at history all the way from the 1870s to 2007, you see a progression of struggle and conflict.
The Jones Montoya house was typical of the ranches that were surrounding the Phoenix area. Today it sits in central Phoenix, but in those days it was in the rural part of Phoenix. Jones Montoya, the name associated with that is Wilson Walker Jones, and he married a Mexican-American woman from Yuma named Alcaria Montoya. She related to the Mexican community, and he would relate to the Anglo community of the time. But it's typical of the mixed Mexican and Anglo marriages that did occur at that time.
Phoenix was a very quiet town. Not a lot of people. Not a lot of people. So we had our leaders. The first fire chief that was Spanish to Mexican was a relative of mine. His name was Angelito Delgado.
Then you also had one of the probably least known and most famous of the Mexican-American marshals here in Phoenix. His name was Enrique Garfias, and he came in the early 1870s to the Phoenix area. He was elected 3 times constable, 5 times he was elected Phoenix Marshal. A lot of the history of the Mexican people is buried in the Pioneer Cemetery here in Phoenix, which is located at 15th Avenue and Madison. And there were so many Hispanics that were buried there, but the tombstones, headstones are now missing over the years. Enrique Garfias, Phoenix's first town marshal, is buried there. We know about where he is, but the exact location hasn't been found. We know he's buried there with his wife. Our Viso grocery store is located near 3rd Street and Buchanan, very close to the Gold Alley area, which basically was in central Phoenix, and was owned by a Mexican family, and it was important commerce to the Mexican Americans who lived in the Gold Alley area.
My father was a warehouse man. He worked at Piggly Wiggly, and he also worked for A.J. Bayless Warehouse. He was a warehouse man. He filled the orders, for the grocery stores. He knew all the codes that were printed on top of the cans. Whenever there were cans that were missing the paper wrappers around them, he was allowed to buy them and bring them home, and we used to store them in our little porch. And he taught us what the numbers meant, so that when Mother needed a can of peaches or a can of peas, she would tell us, bring me a can of peas or peaches or whatever.
The first workers here in Phoenix were building the first modern canal and irrigation to begin farming. They worked in the agricultural areas. They worked in the mines. They were the first vaqueros that began the ranchos and industries, and they were involved in other pursuits, and their working habits have always been impelled by their tradition of the Catholic Church.
Monroe School was started very early in the history of Phoenix. It is historical. Many of the Mexican-American families here in Phoenix remember their parents attending Monroe School.
Monroe School was a very nice school. I enjoyed it all through. Mr. Rumble was the principal. He was always busy. He wouldn't allow anybody to play hooky. He would go looking for them. And most of the kids that did play, all they would do is go to the Adams Hotel. There were some big posters. They would hide in the back. And they wouldn't do anything but not go in, and he would come and pick them up. I met my husband at Monroe School. I was probably about 13. I was sitting in class, and a girl came and left me a note. So I read the note, and he's saying, "Will you be my girlfriend?" And I didn't even know who the boy was, so I just said, "No, absolutely not. I have to finish my schooling." That's where I met him. That's where it got started anyway. I got married, and we had 5 children. He was a very nice man. Very nice, very truthful, very quiet.
Some people said that they wanted to start post-41 because a lot of them are veterans, Hispanic veterans, were coming back from the war. And we're talking about World War II mostly, that they were not so happy that they were kind of like taking over part of post-1 or some of the other posts. But when you start like post-41, you have a lot of Hispanics in it then we have our own post. We have our own commander. We have our own officers. We have this sort of thing. We also have the right to make a determination how we spend the money that we earn.
The founders of that organization were Pipas Fuentes and Ray Martinez, and they started American Legion Post and had huge impacts on civil rights here in the Valley.
Post 41 has always been very good about helping people that need certain things. I do believe that Post 41 is probably the best recognized American Legion post in the country, not just Arizona.
During the war, right after graduation, most of the boys went off to war and left us girls with no social life. The times were hard, and it was a different era. And so the girls that we graduated with, we were all friends, and we formed a club. We called it the Flamingo Club.
Sylvester Herrera is probably the most respected and best known recipient of the Congressional Medal of Honor in the state of Arizona. He was in World War II, at which time he lost both limbs and was able to crawl up the hillside and saved all of his buddies. I was talking to him one day and I said, Sylvester, once you had lost both your legs, you were dragging your legs, why didn't you ask for a corpsman to help you or something? Why did you keep on charging up that mountain and crawling up that mountain? He said, because that was my job. Barry Goldwater was not only a good friend and a member of Post 41, but a big supporter. Whenever we needed some help and everything else, we could ask Barry to help us.
I remember my dad telling me when they were getting together to form Post 41. He says, Barry Goldwater says, we would not have what we have if it wasn't for you guys. He was talking about the Mexicans. One thing my father always told me was, you're as good as anyone. Don't ever let anybody tell you different. I think it comes from his experiences of being in war and suffering through prisoner of war camps. But who provided the human energy? You know, who provided the very necessary labor to make all of this work? You know? And you can, whether you look at the farms or you look at the growth of the city, who built the streets, who did the heavy labor for building the buildings, who dug the ditches. Without the Mexicans, Phoenix would not be what it is.